Well, everybody, cultural appropriation is an incredibly popular topic to talk about in our contemporary cultural era, although I think that it is a topic that is oftentimes phrased on false premises and also false assumptions. Now, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I recently was browsing around on YouTube and I saw someone who I actually follow quite a bit, Amala Yukonobe. I saw her appear on a Dr. Phil segment called Appropriation Nation. Has it gone too far? So I figured that I would react to this segment and offer my analysis, and then, while doing so, try to shed some light on the issue, the ever so contentious issue of cultural appropriation. So before we get into this analysis, if you guys like this video, if you like what I do, or if you're new to this channel, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel, comment, like, do whatever you can, because I think this is a message that everybody can benefit from. Now, let us get into this reaction, the Dr. Phil segment.
Today on an all-new Dr. Phil, cultural appropriation.
I got called all sorts of names for wearing the dress.
You actually got death threats. You were called out for appropriating an anime character.
I was told that I was black and not Japanese.
An anime character. Hold on. An anime character. So now anime is considered to be a part of the protected class that cultural appropriation deems to protect. Anime. Anime is a pop culture phenomena. And pop culture typically isn't seen as being as authentic as actual culture that emerges from ethnic practices, because pop culture itself is engineered. It's engineered by a set of institutions that pump out video games, music, TV shows, and things that set the cultural narrative. And yet that is now also being protected by the cultural appropriation vanguard, even though pop culture doesn't even rise to the same level of authenticity that ethnic culture does. This shows the absolute absurdity of these ideas. The lack of an ethos being a definite meaning by which we can understand how certain things should operate. There is none of that with these sort of chaotic ideas such as cultural appropriation.
I think imitation is a form of flattery.
If somebody wears their hair like you're wearing it, you put that on the same level as racism.
Same level as white supremacy.
White supremacy. There it goes.
I want you to take a look at these pictures for me. Anything jump out at you?
Yes. They're in costumes.
Right. They're in costumes. These are all celebrities who have been called out, criticized, and condemned for cultural appropriation. Has anyone here ever called someone out for cultural appropriation? You too?
Only a few folks.
You have?
Only a few folks.
Has anybody here ever thought twice about wearing something or doing something, even cooking something, out of fear of being accused of appropriation? You have?
Yes.
Yeah, what was it?
My daughter had braids and she wanted me to get braids that were just like hers.
Why her but not you?
She's half black and half white.
Okay.
And so I just think that some things should stick with those cultures.
Look at how this lady, you can see the concern and trepidation on her face as she talks about this. Obviously, she has assigned some kind of importance to this topic. So as this lady tries to irrationally, I might add, explain why she cannot have a certain style of hair because now that is associated with the culture, this professor here, who I think is going to be the instigator and the apologist for these vile ideas, is sitting there smiling. Like, what the heck, man? What kind of rotted soul do you have to sit there and silently exploit a woman's emotional pain to further your impoverished, ethos-lacked idea of the world? It's insane. Hair has only an incidental relationship with culture. No culture owns a style of hair. Hair is a natural property that is in common to most human beings. Now, not to me, obviously. Boo, yeah, laugh all you want. But it's in common to most human beings. Just like me lacking hair does not make me associated with the culture of being a skinhead, me having hair or me not having certain kinds of hair has no bearing on making a cultural statement. It may simply be a style that I have decided fits my fancy. We'll talk about this in a second.
Well, no matter whether you believe it's harmful or you think people should just be allowed to do what they want, there is no doubt this is a hot button topic that people are passionate about. Dr. Neil Lester, a professor of English at Arizona State University, right?
I am, yes.
And you've published, lectured, and taught extensively the area of African American studies. What do you think about appropriation? Do you think this is a real thing, something that people need to be cognizant of? And if so, why?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why?
Well, because if we in fact are trying to look at the humanity of other people, and we are trying to live in a place where we are trying to be respectful and mindful of folks, then we need to be aware of things that are important to other cultures that don't necessarily look like us or share the same values. So it is a thing.
So let's stop right there. So he made an emotional appeal there. If we want to consider the humanity of other people, we ought to consider cultures that don't look like us, and therefore we should engage in cultural appropriation. So he tied two things in that have no business being tying in. In philosophy, we call this a category mistake. He made a category mistake. He misattributed something that belongs in one place to another place. He tied the value of human beings into cultural practices. The value of human beings have absolutely nothing to do with cultural practices and everything to do with man being in the category of man, with human beings being in the category of human beings. By virtue of you being a human being, you have value, regardless of what your culture is. Now, your culture can either help that value or it can decrease that value, can diminish that value. If you belong to a culture that, for example, engages in cannibalism or beheading of its opponents, your culture is decreasing the value of your humanity by having you engage in activities which imperil your conscience. But if you engage in a culture that emphasizes benevolence, that emphasizes mutual respect, charity, emphasizes justice, not social justice, but natural justice, you are engaging in a culture that is increasing your value as a human being, while by engaging you in productive and moral activities. The content of cultural actions, not their existence, is what has an impact on value. But regardless of this axiom, you are valuable because you're a human being, not because of your culture. So the foundation of his argument is now destroyed. I destroyed it. It's gone. It's gone. So then you are just left with this sort of emotional platitude about people who don't look like you, which centers and it puts in the forefront of our mind skin color or appearance as a measure of value. Appearance is not a measure of value. Appearance is a measure of fate. You were designed, in my opinion, with a certain appearance which has no bearing on your humanity. So this argument is bunk. Let's go.
It can appropriate, yes.
Not just white people.
Absolutely. Appropriation is intersectional. So old people can appropriate youth culture can appropriate old folks.
Intersectional.
People who are not incarcerated.
What is youth culture?
Impersonate, prisoners.
What is youth culture? What is old culture? These things are relative. What was old to us right now is not going to be. It was not old at one point in time. For example, the boomer generation, they probably remember I Love Lucy and Little House on the Prairie. They probably remember drive-in theaters, but that's considered old. But at the time, it was actually quite novel. So why are we using time as a measure of value? Why are we using time as a measure of value? Time is not a measure of value. Time is simply a measurement of things that have passed. And this gets into a broader conversation about what is time and the importance of time. But my perspective is that time is not a measure of value. Something can be old and yet very valuable, and something can be young and yet not valuable at all. It depends on the content of that thing and not on how old it is. Let's keep going.
People who are not incarcerated can impersonate, prisoners or those who are incarcerated. Men appropriate women's attire for the sake of funny. and mocking. So absolutely anybody can do it, and everybody on some level.
What is men's
may have
attire?
flirted
What is
with
women's attire? Kilts look just like dresses, and the Scots like to wear kilts. So a kilt could be considered to be a feminine attire, yet in Irish or Scottish culture, excuse me, that is not considered feminine. It's considered quite masculine. So once again, what is this? If you're just basing things, this is the superficial, shallow nature of cultural appropriation, is that it doesn't actually ask itself, what is value? What establishes value? What gives something value? It presumes that value is bound up and tied up in the evident and what is immediately evident by the senses and ignores everything else. This kind of low-level analysis doesn't get you the truth. It gets you to a shadow that looks plausible, but when you actually shine a flashlight on it, it falls down. And professors like this man, their entire goal is to get you to look at shadows that may seem truthful, but in all reality are actually false. Their entire career is built upon an edifice of false ideas. Don't just hear my passion, hear the content of what I'm saying, because I need you guys to understand this. Cultural appropriation is a nonsense idea because it doesn't actually consider the nature of value, and it also does not consider what establishes the grounds for a culture to say, we have been wronged by appropriation. It doesn't even actually consider what appropriation actually looks like when we view cultures from a more grand point of view, as in, is it even possible to appropriate what is already in common to humanity? Let me explain my point here. There are different cultures that cook food differently. A Chinese culture may have a different way of preparing chicken than low country Gullah folks have a different way of preparing chicken, or Jamaican folks. These are all cultural differences. But at the end of the day, they're all using chicken. They're all using chicken and adapting it to their particular preferences. And what you'll see is that even in these giant cultures, there are subcultures and subcategories that deviate from what most people in that culture do. So you can't even establish the grounds for cultural appropriation because there are enough deviational forces that there becomes no general standard. Not only that, but cultures change over time. What doesn't change, however, are underlying principles. So, for example, let's say that I believe an American culture is a thing. Well, American culture is necessarily a combination of different people from different parts of the world, and so you're going to have a little bit of everything, but you still have the universality of natural rights. You still have this idea that the human being, the individual, has dignity by virtue of who they are. You still have this idea that government is instituted among men, and it is consensually given legitimacy by the people. In American culture, you still have this idea, and it's not a cultural idea, it is a universal statement of value which manifests itself in a cultural context. You have to understand the difference between cause and effect before you can make a statement. Here, the professor is mistaking the effect, which is the culture, for the cause. And this, if you don't remember anything else in this video, remember this. Culture is not the cause of principles. Culture is not the cause of morals. Culture is the effect of certain ideas. It is the end result of certain ideas. Therefore, cultural appropriation makes no sense because a culture in itself has no value except what is attributed to it by people and what is given to it by higher principles. What has value is principles, which is why almost every culture in the world has a religious system. Almost every culture in the world has some kind of philosophical system, because what really matters is how that culture sees the world, and everything else flows from that. The head of the river is how the culture sees the world, its principles, and everything else, what they eat, how they dress, how they talk, flows from that. That's the real story. And until cultural appropriation can account for that, because it can't, definitionally, it will never make any sense, and it will always be an abuse of what culture is meant to be. We're almost done with this. We're going to play the rebuttals, and I'll probably be done with this.
Amala, you don't agree.
I don't. No.
You think worrying about appropriation is a waste of time?
I think not only is it somewhat a waste of time, but it's nearly impossible. You just mentioned there are nearly hundreds of ways that one could appropriate somebody else's culture or their livelihood. And to expect any one human being to keep on top of that throughout their entire life, I think, is an unrealistic ask. And I think imitation is a form of flattery. I appreciate my food by eating it. I appreciate the hair that I wear by wearing it, by putting on the clothes that I wear.
She's right.
And every single item around us in this room could probably be attributed to a certain culture. Do we have to constantly worry about what culture we gain things from?
Does intention have anything to do with
Well,
it?
I guess I didn't hear anything about anybody worrying about it. What I hear about when I think about and talk about cultural appropriation is people becoming more aware.
An absolute non sequitur. This is an absolute non sequitur. Amalua made a very good point saying that it's not important to obsess over cultural appropriation because there are just too many things around us in everyday life that could be attributed to other cultures. But the fact that we use those things is actually an endorsement of those things in some way, shape, or form. And he's saying, well, no one's worried about it. We just want people to raise awareness to it. You want to raise awareness to something that she just addressed without actually addressing her point. This is what we call a non sequitur. There are a lot of academics, especially in the liberal arts, that are very astute and proficient at logical fallacies. And I would really encourage all of you to be on the lookout for them because they are the top offenders.
We could say the same thing about racism, sexism, homophobia. Just because you can't solve it and don't see it at every corner doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of it and trying to address it.
Wow, do you really put those on the same level?
I absolutely do.
Racism and sexism, you put it on the same level as cultural appropriation?
That's exactly.
So if somebody wears their hair like you're wearing it, you put that on the same level as racism?
Absolutely. I put that on the same level as white supremacy because white supremacy is intersectional.
No.
Read Audre Lorde.
No. First of all, Audre Lorde is another intellectual, or I should say anti-intellectual generator of these kind of ideas. Audre Lorde, Ferguson, Crenshaw, all of these people that I personally faced during my time in collegiate debate, all of them generate these sort of intersectional oppression, critical race theory ideas, which is really what a lot of this stuff comes from here. If you want to understand the core root, this guy is using intersectionality theory, which developed a little bit after critical race theory, to make a statement about cultural appropriation, to provide a justification for cultural appropriation. If we understand that intersectionality is wrong because it also, just like cultural appropriation, tries to assign value to identity over almost everything else, if we understand that critical race theory is wrong because it has a simplified view of the world and cannot actually account for the various factors that go in to understanding the causes of racism, and because it has already prejudiced itself by assuming that every disparity that happens is a cause of racism, their words, not mine, read words that wound. If we can establish all of those things, then we can say those ideas are anti-intellectual, they are not falsifiable, and they are bunk. They are bunk. They make no sense. They make no common sense. They make no rational sense. They make no sense whatsoever. Yet this guy is pushing them as hard as he can. I'll say this much. White supremacy, like every other term used by this crowd of cultural and intellectual subversives that live loudly in academia, white supremacy is largely a meaningless term at this point in time. It used to be a good descriptor for a set of beliefs that anchored value to the skin color of the white race and used that as a means to attack other people. But now it is a phrase that is used to even describe black folks or non-white people who have a set of ideas. It is a thought-terminating cliche that brings nothing new to the table and actually lays waste to all rationality in its quest to be taken seriously by our society, in its quest to root itself in every institution in our society. So if you're going to use the term white supremacy, use it properly or don't use it at all, because if you use it improperly, you're contributing to the degradation of a language. And if you do that, you're making it harder for a lot of people to find the truth. That's malpractice of the highest degree in you as a human being should know better. All right, guys, I'm not going to watch this entire thing. The video's already gone long for a long time, but this is just a few minutes of this Dr. Phil clip. There is more of it. I will link it in the description down below. Make up your own mind. Make up your own choices about what you think about this stuff. Let me know in the comments what you think about cultural appropriation. Was my analysis convincing? I don't know. You guys tell me. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video, my friends. I love you guys so much, and please, forever and eternally, stay pensive, my friends. Bye.